Good evening, members, ladies and gentlemen, members of the public. And I do apologise, we're a couple of minutes late starting here at Lichfield District Council's Planning Committee meeting. But here we are on the 3rd of July, 2023, and it's 2 minutes past 6. We're going to start off with the agenda, and you'll see, members, that the first item on your agenda is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Galvin.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I think we have a full house, more or less, apart from that. Is that correct? And Councillor Powell's not here, is he? But I've not received any apologies from Councillor Powell. Members, item 2 on your agenda is declarations of interest. Can I please have a show of hands for those of you who feel as though you do have an interest in any of these applications this evening? Councillor Salter, please.
Thank you, good evening, Chair. Yes, the third application on our agenda, 22/01533 FUH. I will be speaking on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any others, please? Wait a minute. Sorry, Councillor Ashton, did you wish to declare an interest at all?
I wish to declare an interest on behalf of a Liberal Democrat councillor who lives close to the site of the proposed solar farm.
Fully understood. Thank you very much indeed. I think for the record, that would be Councillor Benyon, is that correct? Thank you very much. Any other declarations of interest? Councillor Anketel, please.
In connection with item 22/0128/FUL, land adjacent to 121 Upper Street, St. John Street. I am a member of the Lichfield City Council, member for that board, but I wasn't involved in any discussions about it.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Harvey Coggins, please.
I'm like Diane, also a member for St John's, but I have no.
That's fine. Thank you very much. I always think with declarations of interest, if you're not sure, then at least if you declare it, it's all above board. Thank you very much. Is that it? No more declarations of interest. Thank you. Members, it seems an awfully long time ago, and in fact it was the 3rd of April that we last had a meeting, so that's exactly 3 months ago. But you've had the minutes of that meeting held on the 3rd of April circulated to you as part of the report. Are you happy that I signed those as a true and correct record of the meeting which took place on the 3rd of April? Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have a copy of the minutes? Okay, we'll do that afterwards, but thank you very much indeed. Members, that now brings us on to item 4, which is the reason that we're all here this evening. We have got 5 planning applications to discuss, the first of which is 22001110/FULM, and to take us through that, we have got Principal Planning Officer Sarah Atherton. Sarah, if you're ready, we're ready for you, so please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The application before you tonight proposes the installation of a solar farm comprising ground-mounted solar voltaic panels with a generating capacity of up to 49.9 megawatts with all associated works and necessary infrastructure. The application is being reported to committee due to objections received by the council and the consideration of the senior officers. The application site is an irregular parcel of land located within the parish of Clifton Campville and extending to around 70 hectares. The application site is comprised of a number of agricultural fields lying to the northwest and southeast of Clifton Lane. The surrounding area is predominantly rural in character, interspersed with residences and farms. The settlement of Clifton Campville lies to the north of the site, Thorpe Constantine to the east, which can be seen just here, and Hornsey to the northwest. 2 residential dwellings, Highfields Cottage and Highfields Farmhouse, which is a grade 2 listed building, lie between the northern and southern sections of the site, which are connected by an access track to the eastern periphery of the site. Land levels across the site vary. The application proposes the installation of ground-mounted solar panels, substations, inverters, and a DNO substation, which provides connection to the existing grid infrastructure within the site. It's located approximately there. The solar panels will individually measure 1.3 by 2.2 meters and will be arranged on tables of 24 or 48. The tables will reach a maximum height of 3.2 meters from the existing ground level, and will be angled at 10 to 25 degrees depending on the topography of the area. There will be 2 to 6 meters between each row of tables. Landscaping proposals accompany new native hedgerow planting and trees to aid screening around the site in some areas, as well as the additional enhancements to existing field boundaries in and surrounding the site. Habitat enhancements for great crested newts are proposed at this pond, which is existing within the site. Areas beneath the panel will be grass and will be grazed by sheep for approximately 6 months of the year. Additional areas of wildflower and winter bird seed mix planting are also proposed. The development will generate up to 49.9 megawatts for a maximum of 40 years, after which the proposed development will be decommissioned and the site restored to agricultural use. The key issues for consideration are the impact upon the historic environment, the impact upon the character of the landscape, the cumulative impact of this and a recently consented scheme at Thornton for a solar farm, the impact on visual amenity, and the loss of agricultural land. Turning to the historic environment, the impact upon the setting of surrounding heritage assets, notably Highfields Farmhouse, grade 2 listed, which lies between the northern and southern components of the site, but also surrounding heritage assets, has been assessed and considered by the Council's Conservation Officer throughout the application. Following an initial objection, amendments have been sought by officers to reduce the impact upon the setting of heritage assets. Upon the advice of the Council's Conservation Officer, panels within fields A and C, which originally came up to the site boundary here, have been removed to lessen the impact on this grade 2 listed building. The panels have now set back and additional native hedgerow planting is proposed to screen those panels. Turning to a representative viewpoint, this looks into fields A and C from an existing field access off Clifton Lane that's sited opposite Highfields Farmhouse and illustrates what the proposed development might look like when in situ. So you can see that these areas of the fields here and here don't have any panels in. This hedge to the left forms the site boundary, that's southern boundary of the site. So that's a representative viewpoint. These are photos taken from the public right of way to the west of the site as indicated by the numbers 1 and 2 on that site plan. Photo 1 shows the view from the trig point adjacent to field A and looks in an easterly direction through field A. This area of the field will not have panels within it, as panels are set to the north within that field. That hedgerow on the right is the southern boundary of the site. Photo 2, taken from the same point, so I've got the trig point in there as a marker, looks back towards Clifton Campbell. You can see there the grade 1 listed church at Clifton Campbell, which sits within the Clifton Campbell conservation area, is discernible with on the horizon. There will be panels visible from this point and looking in this direction. The Conservation Officer has concluded that following the amendments and reduction of panels in these fields, that less than substantial harm to the setting of these heritage assets will occur as a result of the development. Turning to the impact upon the character of the landscape. This is a landscape defined at a district level. It is not the landscape of national importance, such as an area of outstanding natural beauty or a national park. The vision for this landscape at district level recommends the retention of field boundaries, enhanced tree cover and improved biodiversity within the landscape. Going back to the site plan, the application proposes those enhancements to biodiversity and retains the existing field boundaries. The application is supported by a landscape visual impact assessment, which has been reviewed by landscape experts appointed by the council. Their review of this landscape visual impact assessment concludes that the development will not breach the threshold where the defining characteristic of this landscape would be lost, and the introduction of these structures is not considered harmful to those defining characteristics. This is a constraints plan of the site. This shows the site before you for consideration tonight here, highlighted in pink, and then the recently consented scheme at Hornton in blue. The boldly coloured lines are public rights of way and bridle ways in and around or close to and around the site, and the numbers in square boxes are the varying land levels across the site. Turning to the impact upon visual amenity, this site will be visible from public rights of way in the area and from some nearby residential dwellings. The LBIA review commissioned by officers considered that the impact on visual amenity from the majority of views reduces over time as the proposed landscaping matures. Turning to the cumulative impact, so the impact of those two schemes together, the LBIA has again been assessed by landscape specialists in respect of these potential cumulative visual impacts of the two schemes together. Both isolated and sequential cumulative views of the schemes are possible. However, these are assessed as not being substantial negative impacts due to the level of existing vegetation and the undulating topography of the area. In terms of the long distance visibility from public rights of way, this will reduce over time as the proposed landscaping matures. Further information provided by the applicant demonstrates that the cumulative impacts of the scheme do not result in unacceptable effects in terms of visual impact. Got some photographs from close to surrounding public rights of way. So photograph 3, and again those arrows indicate where they're taken from, looks down what will be the proposed access track shown here. And you can see the existing infrastructure running across the site. That's taken from on or very close to a public right of way. Taken from the same point, photograph 4 looks back to Highfield Cottage. This field here is outside the development area and won't contain any panels. So it's just the areas within the red line that will contain panels. Photograph 5 is taken close to the public right of way. Kind of the public right of way running down this track here. Sorry, it's really hard. And looks in a northerly direction. So again, as a marker, you can see that infrastructure, those pylons running across the site. Following, turning to the potential loss of best and most versatile agricultural land. Following previous presentation at committee, officers were instructed to further assess the details supplied within the agricultural land classification report. Officers contacted Natural England, who are the statutory consultee in respect of developments which have the potential to lose large amounts of best and most versatile agricultural land. Soil experts at Natural England reviewed that agricultural land classification report, and comments and recommendations were provided from Natural England to the applicant. The report was updated to reflect these comments. Officers then sent the report back to Natural England soils experts. The revised report having identified 1 hectare of best and most versatile land. The findings of the report and the agricultural land classification within that report have been verified by Natural England in their role as statutory consultee. So in summary, Natural England agree the findings of the report that there's 1 hectare of grade 3A land.
On the computer itself. if
Yeah.
possible. Or has the computer
Oh,
frozen?
that's it.
That's it, okay.
Hopefully it won't run forward all the clicks have been there.
Well, thank you.
This plan shows the landscape and habitats improvements across the site, which deliver a 20% net gain as required by policy for biodiversity on site. In summary, the proposed scheme is considered to result in less than substantial harm to the setting of heritage assets. It does result in harm, but the NPPF requires that where harm is assessed as occurring, it must be balanced against the public benefits of a development. In respect of the impact upon the character of the landscape, it's considered that the landscape is capable of accommodating the development proposed without losing the defining characteristics of the landscape. The impact on visual amenity is assessed to be of varying degrees. The temporary reversible nature of the scheme is considered to reduce the harm arising for the scheme and is secured by condition of this recommendation. National planning policy also requires that planning should support the transition to a low carbon future and requires planning approve applications where the effects can be made acceptable. The scheme will deliver significant benefits for the members of the public, which will reach beyond the site itself. The development will serve to provide sufficient clean energy to power 14,000 homes or 17,000 electronic vehicles annually. This is the equivalent of sufficient supply for the entirety of households within Lichfield City, or 30% of households within the district, which contributes towards reduced reliance on and emissions from other generation sources and offers security of supply. Economic benefits are derived from both the construction and operation of the development, and further environmental benefits from the increased biodiversity are delivered through the landscape and habitat improvements. On balance, the harm to listed buildings, the impact on visual amenity, and the impact upon the character of the landscape and the loss of a small amount of best and most versatile land are not considered to clearly and convincingly outweigh the public and environmental benefits of this scheme, and therefore do not in this instance present a robust reason for the refusal of the application. As such, it is recommended for approval, subject to conditions contained with the officer's report. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. You covered an awful lot of detail there in that 10 minutes. Thank you very much indeed for that. So the next stage of the process, members, is that I shall invite two speakers. The first one is the objector, Mr. James Collier, and the second will be on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Simon Chapman. So I'd like to invite, please, James Collier to take his position, please. You have 5 minutes, as you will be familiar, I'm sure. And with 30 seconds still to go, you will be reminded that you only have that 1/2 minute to elapse. So your time will start as soon as you start speaking. And as I say, you have got 5 minutes, but you will be required to stop speaking if you are still doing so when 5 minutes has expired. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so I'm James Collier. I've been asked to represent a number of local residents on this. Members will be aware of the strong local opposition to the scheme, and the primary concerns are around land quality and the visual effect on the landscape and the effect of it on the listed buildings, including Highfields Farm and Clifton Church. Members will have no doubt seen the various letters of objection even up to today's date. I'll concentrate on two principal planning issues, being land quality and the effect on the heritage assets. Members will be aware that this application was deferred at the April planning meeting due to uncertainty about the evidence on land quality, and you have read Natural England's comments on the original land grading report, I'm sure, which were summarised in the officer's report. They were concerned about the speed of the inspection, in that they would have expected a survey of this type to take to average about 20 hectares per day of survey time. This survey seemed to have been done in 2 days, so 79 hectares a day. So they were slightly concerned about the how well that had been done. They were concerned about various other things in the report, including concerns about the accuracy of the assessment of the wetness class of the land, which is quite a key consideration. Naturally, you can seem happier with the revised land grading report, but they still stated in the latest comment they do still have concerns over the speed of the survey, i.e. how fast it was done and how accurately it was done. We also have concerns about the robustness of the report, and the comments that have been made in the supplementary report, which has been circulated, have come from a very experienced local farmer, so someone who's put an awful lot of work into looking at the land grading report and analysing it. The concerns would be, the first report indicated that it had been done by one person, whereas the revised report now states it was done by 2 people, but it doesn't give any information as to the identity or the qualifications of the second person, so we don't really know exactly who was there. The owner of Highfields Farm, at the centre of the site, confirms that despite all the points being shown on the land that he owned and he was renting at the time, nobody actually came to his land to do any surveying. So he doesn't know. Certainly those all the points, there didn't seem to be actually anyone who actually came and had a look. In May 2009, when the survey was done, about half the application site was in oilseed rape. And as you may know, a crop of oilseed rape in May is about 5 or 6 feet high and extremely difficult to walk through. About half of the application site was in oilseed rape. The samples could have been taken on the tram lines, but they would have been affected due to compaction in the wheelings. So we do find it slightly difficult to believe that a surveyor would have been able to trample through the crops and survey as many points as were shown on the plan. And certainly we don't feel that that actually was something that did happen in a lot of cases. Photograph 1 on page 11 of the original report supposedly shows a sample taken in one of the fields of oilseed rape, but this photograph shows a sample lying on a field of grass. So there would have been no reason for moving the sample to a grass field to take a photograph, so we wonder whether this is accurately labelled. The notes on the methodology say that each point on the plan is where a boring point may have been taken, but the report doesn't give any information as to exactly which points actual borings were taken and which results have been extrapolated from nearby ones. So this all adds up, in my opinion, for there to be a considerable degree of uncertainty still about the robustness of the revised report, based on concerns about the amount and the quality of the sampling that was actually physically undertaken. Notwithstanding the theoretical land grade, the land's been used for many years for high quality crops such as potatoes and sugar beet. And it's farmed by a tenant on a long-term farm business tenancy, which he'll have to give up if this application is approved. The land comprises about 15% of the tenant's farming business, and the scheme will have a significant adverse impact on the farming business and a knock-on effect on other local farm contractors and employees. Finding a similar block of irrigatable land like this to replace it in the local area is practically impossible. So this is likely to be a long-term, if not permanent, reduction in the scale of this farming business. The officer's report states at paragraph 24.7 that the proposal will result in economic benefits. This opinion ignores the fact that a significant amount of economic activity behind any acre of crops grown on this land, particularly potatoes. So that's a difficult one to do. The setting of the listed building, it remains the case that Historic England are objecting to the application. The temporary nature of the application as well is something that's mentioned in the officer's report. And I think it needs to be borne in mind that even though it says a temporary, it's extremely unlikely that this thing will be temporary.
Thank you very much indeed to Mr. Collier there. Thank you, Mr. Collier, for that. It's now the turn of the applicant or the applicant's agent to speak. And so I'll just reiterate the protocol here. Mr. Chapman, you have 5 minutes with 30 seconds still to go. You will be reminded of it by Christine on my left, as you just heard. And at the end of 5 minutes, if you are still speaking, you must cease. Thank you. And your time will start as soon as you commence. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members and officers. Thank you for allowing the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant. As the planning officer has mentioned, this application in respect of the installation of a solar farm with a total generating capacity of just under 50 megawatts, sufficient to meet the average consumption of 14,000 houses or 17 electric vehicles per annum. Permission is requested for a limited period of 40 years, after which the land will be reverted to its current agricultural use. The applicant has been submitted by Elgin Energy, who have a proven track record for developing solar parks throughout the countryside across the UK and Ireland. They are dedicated to maintaining the highest standards both during and post-construction. Prior to the submission of this application, a request was made to the council for pre-application advice in September 2019. The pre-application advice, while acknowledging the sustainable energy benefits of the proposal, advised on areas in which supporting information would be required. Following the pre-application advice, we undertook a public exhibition exercise. However, due to COVID restrictions which were in place at the time, a leaflet was sent out in October 2021, inviting to view the proposal on a dedicated website. As a result of the pre-application engagement, the design of the proposal has been refined, including a reduction in terms of the area and scale of the proposed solar farm. We would highlight that ongoing positive discussions have taken place during the application's assessment, and the applicant has worked closely with the case officer in order to respond to consultation responses. Areas of the application we would like to highlight include, in terms of the initial response from the council's landscape consultant, additional information has been supplied. In their subsequent response, it was acknowledged that as the proposed landscaping develops over time, the visual impact of the viewpoints will be reduced. The landscape has the capacity to accommodate the proposed development, which would be for a limited period, after which the site would be restored to its current agricultural use. The application included a number of ecological reports, which have been assessed by the council's ecologist, who has advised that the proposed development would not adversely impact on the site's ecology. In addition, due to the site's relationship with the River Meads Special Area of Conservation, a habitat regulations assessment has been prepared. This assessment concluded that the proposals are unlikely to adversely affect the integrity of the River Meads SAC. This was confirmed again by Natural England, as they agreed with the conclusions of the HRA. Finally, the submitted biodiversity metric demonstrates the proposed development is able to achieve above the required biodiversity net gain. In terms of historic environment, as the level of harm to the heritage asset has been assessed to be less than substantial, paragraph 202 of the NPPF advises that this harm can be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. These benefits include generation of renewable energy, reduction in emissions that is derived from the increased solar energy, temporary and fully reversible nature of the scheme, and additional biodiversity gains previously mentioned. Whilst there have been concerns regarding the loss of agricultural land, we would highlight that there is only a small isolated area of classified 3A land within the proposed red line, while a majority of the site is class 3B, which is not considered to be best or most versatile. The proposal is for temporary use, after which it will be put back to its current state. The land will continue being agricultural use in the form of grazing of sheep. While a site is used as a solar farm, it would enable the soil to regenerate after years of intensive farming, and the site is outside boundaries of sensitive designations. Furthermore, the development would contribute to sustainable development and solar regeneration, which are both supported by national and local policies. To conclude, the proposal complies with national and local policies, and we support the Planning Officer's comprehensive and robust assessment of these proposals for its recommendation to approve, and trust this will be endorsed by committee. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much indeed, and you were within the 5 minutes as well, so thank you very much indeed for that. So, members, you've heard two sides of the argument now. You've also had the report very comprehensively enunciated by Sarah Addison, the Principal Planning Officer. So I'm sure some of you have got some questions, but before I take any questions or comments, I think if I could just ask a question of Sarah Addison, please. Sarah, it was, I think, pointed out by the objector, Mr. Collier, that there are reservations being expressed on page 17 under 8.7 Historic England. That it says their final comments, which were received in December of last year, it says no further comment on additional information, refer to previous detailed advice provided, concerns with the scheme. So those are the three words which are concerning for me. And also the last paragraph or the last sentence of their more fulsome report, which they submitted in February of last year, goes on to say, they request the LPA consider the bar high in weighing the impact of the proposed development against public benefit and the avoidance of harm by the potential to locate the solar farm in a less sensitive location. So really, there we have Historic England statutory body giving a fairly stark assessment where they're saying we need to be very careful about weighing up the pros of this plan, this application, because they consider to be quite a few disadvantages from their perspective. And they even go on to say that perhaps we should be even considering a less sensitive location. Now that to me rings a few alarm bells, if I'm honest with you. So I don't know whether you could just come back on that for me, please, because it does seem to be a degree of harm, I think, to the local setting.
Certainly, Chair. The comments, as you stated, from historic England, the most recent ones following the revision to the scheme reiterate their previous concerns. The revisions to the scheme have been undertaken by with the advice of our own conservation specialist, Edward Higgins. Those revisions were advised to reduce the harm to the setting of the listed buildings. They don't remove the harm. There's no harm to the buildings themselves. It is to the setting, so there's no physical harm to the buildings. And the advice of Edward as our specialist on the revised layout is that it does result in less than substantial harm to Highfields Farmhouse and to the other historic assets. As the MPPF sets out for us, where harm does arise, we must weigh it against the public benefit, which is considered to be quite substantial in terms of site selection as well. The application has gone through a site selection process. There are certain things that are required to find a viable site, and those have been undertaken and are set out in the plan statement submitted in support of the application.
Okay. Can I just come back on one of the points about the public benefits? Public benefits, of course, in this particular case, is very much centred around the production of renewable electricity, of course. And I was looking at a profile yesterday of the characteristics in the Northern Hemisphere at a latitude of about 53 degrees, which is where we are. And the actual benefit of the solar production during December and January is 20% of what it is in June and July. Now, that to me has to be part of the process when we weigh up the benefits, because the true benefit of those solar panels really only seems to come into its own, I think, when our days are fairly long. I know we're getting a little bit technical here, but when you consider the impact it's having on the landscape, the real benefit is only to be really observed, I think, for maybe 4 months of the year. And I think that reduces the public benefit, which of course we're using to weigh up the pros and cons here. The other thing I would say, and this hasn't been referenced in the report at all, is that I believe the tenant farmer has got an anaerobic digester. Now, anaerobic digesters, I believe that's correct anyway. I don't know whether I'm sure I'm right in saying that. Yes, I has an anaerobic digester. For those of you who don't know, anaerobic digesters are effectively like a cow's gut. They take organic material, as does a cow, and they turn it into energy, heat energy, and methane. The methane, biomethane, is a gas which can be used for producing power. There's also heat produced as well. Now, that anaerobic digester is currently producing a lot of renewable electricity from the organic material, the organic waste, etc., and also maize, I believe, grown on the farm, and from waste potatoes. So when we say that we are going to benefit to the tune of 14,000 homes or 17,000 electric vehicles, and I drive an electric vehicle, I'm still to be convinced of their benefit and whether they're going to save the planet, because quite unequivocally they will not. When I look at the figures and it says we're going to get a net benefit of 14,000 homes being powered or 17,000 electric vehicles, that actually I would question, because I don't think it's taken into account. If this land was taken away from this particular farmer, then his ability to produce renewable electricity and methane from his anaerobic digester would be compromised. So the point is, I don't think we've got a net figure there. We have a gross figure, and I think the net figure is what we should be addressing and assessing in this balance. So that's probably come as a bit of a surprise to you, I'm sure. But all I'm saying is, I think we have slightly over-egged the benefits, and I don't think we have given due weight to some of the disadvantages that we have here. I do think the impact which has been highlighted by Historic England is something which we really need to take into account here as well. And I also heard the reservations expressed by the objector, Mr. Collier. about the speed with which the assessment was done, the ALC was done. And I know that that has been highlighted in a report which I think was submitted on the 30th of May, and subsequently added quite late to our site. I realise it was a technical issue, but Ms. Pugh submitted a report which was indeed questioning the veracity of some of the aspects, as has been echoed by our objector this evening.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and come back on some of
Okay,
those.
thank you.
In respect of the anaerobic digester of the current tenant farmer, I have no information on that and can't make comment on it at this stage. The benefits in terms of generation, I'm assured, are on a 20%, which is the industry algorithm for working out the output for these panels. So I'm assured that those are accurate. I don't have any information before me in determining this, nor has any been submitted on the current output of that anaerobic digestion, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to attempt to make that calculation here tonight. In terms of the reservations of Historic England, they do raise concerns. They do not raise objections to this scheme, and those concerns are similar to other concerns raised at similar schemes within the district. They do not raise an objection, they raise a grave concern. In terms of the speed of the ARC, I have reviewed in detail more than once the comments received from local residents in terms of the agricultural land classification report, and those received on the 30th of May. As officers, we rely on experts to reach a determination in a number of fields. I have contacted Natural England and specifically requested that they review the agricultural land classification report, both the initial version and the subsequently revised version. I rely on their expert opinion in this respect in terms of verifying the agricultural land classification as an independent expert. I've read the concerns that are raised, but ultimately, in terms of assessing the application, I have to do so with the advice of those experts.
Thank you. Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Sorry to give you some fairly challenging questions to deal with. Do we have any questions or comments, please, from members? Councillor Ashton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was contacted regarding the land quality assessment. Apparently the land is now under potatoes and maize, which would make the land classified as 3A, I believe. I'm not an expert on these matters. I'm not an expert on land classification. I simply pass this on as it was reported to me. An additional point is something that I saw recently, is that large-scale solar and wind facilities may have a long waiting list to be connected to the national grid. The national grid is not capable of absorbing the output from these facilities. Again, I'm no expert on this. This is just something I've seen, and I wanted to confirm and comment on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ashton.
In terms of the land quality, I'm just going to reference my previous comments in terms of we've reached out to Natural England as the experts in this respect. They've engaged their soil experts, and I think we're all aware of the comments they've made in respect of that. In terms of the time it takes for those developments to be brought into use, again, I can't really comment on that. We have conditions attached that restrict the time for which this development will generate power, and should construction be paused before that time and cease for a period of 3 months, there's also a condition that states, condition 4. Sorry, not condition 4, condition 3. It sets out that this is a temporary permission that expires within 40 years, or within 6 months of the cessation of energy generation, or any permanent cessation of construction works for a period of 3 months or longer prior to the solar PV facility coming into operational use.
Thank you.
Those are the conditions.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions at all, please? Councillor Hughes, please, and then Councillor Salter.
Thank you very much. I suppose I had a question as a relatively new member about difficulty of spending, significant part of the weekend reading a very detailed report and then having new things about anabolic digestion
Anaerobic
further
digest.
matters introduced. So I'll make that point. I also wonder about the winter point that we can't have solar panels that only appear in the summer clearly. And I mean, I'm a historian as well as a councillor. I was a bit worried about the Motte Bailey, but it did seem to me that what we're talking about, we're not talking about something that has no impact or no harm. We're talking about a very balanced difficulty between what does seem to me on balance an excellent carbon, green energy proposal versus things that will have some impact, but it's the degree of harm rather than assuming we can have something that's perfect. So I suppose my question, I have a question is this: I think one of the conditions is an archaeological survey, and I was wondering about the sort of nature of that and impact of that.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. So yeah, in respect of the Motte Bailey, I've been to visit it. You can't publicly access the top, it's fenced off. I'm not sure if that's to stop it degrading or wear and tear or what have you, but it's not publicly accessible. So that view from the top of the Motte Bailey scheme, it isn't publicly accessible. In terms of I think you're referring to condition 6 and condition 7, which secure a written scheme of investigation. These are archaeological conditions which ensure that prior to the commencement of development, the applicant undertakes some investigation and writes a report essentially, which is then sent to the local planning authority. We rely in terms of archaeology on the experts at the county, so the county archaeologist, and that's secured by condition 6, so that they'll investigate the site for any evidence or previously unknown archaeological evidence. And then condition 7 also secures that if there is any archaeological work and reporting, that would be the focus of a separate WSI. So if they do find anything, there'd be another condition to secure subsequent archaeological mitigation, and that should be undertaken within 3 months. And those are both conditions recommended by that expert at county to ensure that the archaeological any archaeological assets of the site are discovered and assessed properly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Next one then is Councillor Salter, please.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Councillor Salter, thank you.
Just wondered if the condition relating to the production of power could be reworded slightly to encompass the fact that it should be online. If we've heard that there is a delay in getting power to the grid, the fact is that a solar panel will produce power when it's not connected to anything. So I wonder if that could just be expanded.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I quite understand.
Yeah, I think Councillor Salter's saying, I'm sorry,
No, Councillor Salter's saying that the point is being made that the grid capacity is insufficient at the moment to take on all the new production which is coming on around the nation via wind turbines and solar farms, etc. So I think the condition says that it's when the solar panels start producing power. Whereas I think the point he's making is he thinks that that start date, should that realistically be when it starts producing power, which is then fed into the national grid? Is that the point you're making, Councillor Salter?
Indeed, Chairman, yes, usable power connected to the grid. Rather than bring back the point any differences in there, producing power and doing nothing.
Thanks very much, thank you.
Sorry, just bear with me whilst I read. It is quite a meaty condition.
Councillor Evans, I know you wish to speak as well. Can I just establish at this point, Councillor Anketel, and I think we have Vice Chairman as well, Councillor Checkland. Do we have any other speakers, please, at this point? Okay, thank you. I'm going to say as well, for the benefit of the new members, we don't get very many applications for solar farms, so this is almost a new one, I suppose, even for the more experienced councillors on the planning committee. So it is a baptism of fire for us all in one sense, I suppose. And I hope you haven't been baffled too much by some of the technicalities. So we're just checking on the details of that condition in terms of the were this to be approved, when the start date would be in terms of the planning application. Do we want to come back to this one? Would it be better if we came back to this? Perhaps Kerry, if you were able to interrogate this, and then Stuart as well. If you want to have a look at that while we're dealing with other members' points, then we can perhaps come back to that in a few minutes. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Salter, that was your point. Yes. We shall have to revisit that in a few moments. Councillor Evans, please.
Yes, Chairman. I wanted to ask the first of all, we had the words on balance. Well, on balance suggests that it could be one way or another. It's actually not all cut and dried. So I'd like some clarification on that. I also want clarification on the temporary 40 years, because 40 years to me sounds an awful long time, and how temporary is temporary? Who determines 40 years is temporary? Because I would have thought that was virtually almost permanent. I do understand the concerns of residents and objectors over the loss of agricultural land, and I'm also concerned that the Grade 2 listed building is almost enclosed by this farm, particularly with that bit that sticks out as well on its own. So I think for people around, and from what we've seen from the pictures where there is a conservation area close by, that is of concern that this listed building is going to be virtually disappear within the solar farm. So those are my concerns at the moment, Chair.
Councillor Evans, thank you very much. Sarah, are you in a position to come back on these whilst this matter is being dealt with by your colleagues? Thank you very much. If you'd like to come back on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. All planning is a balance, and the balance in this one is, as set out in the report, that the benefit outweighs those harms. There is a huge amount of national support for these schemes, having regard for recent appeal decisions that affect some or more than one of the harms, as it were, that we see today. My opinion as an officer is that the balance, the benefits do outweigh those harms. In terms of 40 years, that's a normal time for solar schemes. I think in part that's derived from the lifetime of the panels. So the panels will only work for so long. And that's where we arrive at the temporary for. It's the application is for that long. That's how long we propose to grant it. And that's where we come to the temporary nature from.
Thank you very much.
Did you want to come back about the listed buildings?
Yeah.
So in the discussions that were had with the council's conservation officer, I think you're talking about this when you said the bit that sticks out below. It was his opinion that actually field H, which is, if that field you can just barely discern the H there, didn't have as great an impact upon the setting of the listed building as the panels that were originally proposed here. And it was upon his advice that panels were removed from those fields to lessen that impact upon the setting of the listed building.
Thank you very much.
Does that answer your questions, Councillor Evans?
Well, probably not the answers I really wanted to hear.
Okay, but the point about on balance, of course, is valid. You're absolutely right. And in fact, so many of the decisions that we have to make are on balance, aren't they? They when all said and done, it's weighing up the pros and cons, which I mentioned earlier. If we could please come on to Councillor Anketel, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm all in favour of food security, and I understand that there will be sheep that will be grazing on the grass between underneath the panels. With regard to the need for solar panels, we are actually in a situation of grave climate emergency, and we're already falling behind our aim to have carbon neutral generation by 2050. I have solar panels. My panels are guaranteed for 25 years, but I hope they last longer. I get a feed-in tariff, so I get paid for the money my panels feed into the grid. And over the summer months, I think I get paid 3 or 4 times as much as I do over the winter months. I do get paid a feed-in tariff over the winter months on top of the stuff I'm using myself. It's all very well talking about agricultural land being of high value, but if the climate degrades to such an extent as we've begun to feel in this country as well as elsewhere, we have intense droughts, some years, sometimes droughts here on 2 or 3 years in succession, and intense rain and floods, sometimes 3 times in a year, sometimes in the same place. So if we don't soon get rid of our carbon emissions overall, then we're going to no good having fine agricultural land. We won't be able to do anything on it, but for one reason or another. With regard to these biodigested stuff or whatever, producing methane, methane actually is 4 times or more as bad as carbon dioxide as insulator. Methane can be burned to produce electricity, but that produces carbon dioxide anyway. So it's called renewable energy, but it produces carbon dioxide, which is not so good. So I think on balance, the photovoltaic cells are an asset we must have. Otherwise, we're rushing into catastrophe with our eyes open, as the Secretary General of the United Nations said.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anketel. Yes, feed-in tariffs for your electric solar panels, of course, courtesy of all of us around this room, courtesy of the taxpayer. And nearly all of these renewable energy projects, of course, are very substantially funded by taxpayers' money, which is one of the problems I have with it. In terms of carbon dioxide and being produced by the burning of methane, you're absolutely right. But carbon dioxide only forms 0.04% of the Earth's atmosphere, and without it, there will be no plant life on Earth at all. So the demonisation of carbon dioxide is perhaps misplaced, because it's absolutely a vital gas, and it is only, as I say, 420 parts per million. Do we have the next speaker, which is Councillor Checkland, the Vice Chairman, please?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I do share the Chair's concerns over electric vehicles, but on the other hand, I think that houses should be heated, and we should have electricity for those. Moving on, I agree with Councillor Evans, 40 years temporary, I'm not going to check it. By anaerobic digesters, digesters, I do know someone who has one of these on their farm, and they bring stuff from all the different farms outside in order to fuel this. So the fact that one farm is not producing it, I don't think is particularly an issue, because there are other people who need to get their stuff anaerobically digested. At the last meeting, this matter was deferred because it was raised as to whether or not we were putting this onto a higher grade of land than it should be put on. This was sent back to the experts, as Sarah has already said, and it's been reviewed, it's gone back to Natural England. And they have endorsed the fact that this is appropriate land for this to be put on. Condition 3, I think it's going to get covered anyway. It actually says 40 years from commissioning from first energisation. Now, a lot depends what the word energisation means. It means as soon as the solar panel sits in heat because it's energised, or if it means it's attached to the grid, I think they're two completely different things. And if there is an issue, as Councillor also said, the speed at which things are being connected to the grid, if it takes 10 years to be put to the grid, that's immediately goods listing as 50 years. So perhaps the I know the condition's been changed once at the request, I believe, of the developers, whether or not it should be changed back to the original, and it'd be 40 years for time of completion of the site. And then if they spend 10 years trying to connect it, well, that sort of thing, they need to get figured out. Listed buildings and Natural England, yes, they express concern. I think we should look after it. I really do think we should look after it. At the same time, we've really got to look forward, not backwards. And this is a step forwards, as Councillor Patel said, in relation to our green agenda, which I think all political parties buy into. Most of the people you talk to buy into. And government encourages. Whether they're right or wrong at the moment, we believe they're right. So I propose to accept the proposals of the plan.
Thank you, Councillor Chaplin. So, Councillor Chaplin, that is a formal proposal, isn't it, for approval? Yes. Councillor Chaplin, yes.
Is that someone or something?
Ending that. Thank you very much.
Is that with the change of condition?
We're just coming on to that now.
Should we do the condition first before we go any further? So we're just going to revisit the condition.
No. Yes.
Okay.
Chair, can I propose it then with the condition reviewed to find out what energisation means? If it means as soon as it's finished built and running 40 years from there, as opposed to when it's connected to the grid.
Okay, so we need to take the vote, which has been proposed and seconded. But this condition is still open, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Right.
Can we establish the condition first, please?
Right,
I think
okay,
that's
so
essential.
Can we actually pause for a moment? So the person who has proposed actually first has asked for clarification of what that word means.
That was Councillor Salter, wasn't
It was actually- Yeah, so it's what
So it's
energisation means. So can we get an answer to that query?
it? We do that first,
Because-
please.
Based on that, the proposer may actually withdraw
Okay,
and want to then go through an amendment.
thank you. So if we can seek clarification, please, on the definition of when the solar panels start.
Yes, Chair, through you. So the first energisation that's referred to in condition 3, we understand that to be connection to the grid. If members feel that that needs to be tightened up, then that is something that we could do, and I'd suggest that's delegated to officers to confirm that within condition 3. If I could just come back on Councillor Salter's question as well, because question 3 is essentially what happens if when they connect to the grid, and if they stop producing energy for a period of 6 months. So I think Councillor Salter's concerns are basically if they don't begin energisation at all within 6 months, then the solar panels just sit there.
No, if I may come back in, Chairman. No, my concern was, given that there appears to be a significant delay and a linked delay in this type of production being able to be connected, whether it's 6 months or 10 years, as has just been referred to, we need to identify that start point as being when it is connected. if it ceases to produce during its term, then yes, those conditions come in. But you just said that we assume that to me. I think we need this clarified and put in writing that this is how we feel it should be.
Can I just come in here, please? I mean, it's quite obvious that if we take the start point as when it starts feeding into the grid, as has well been pointed out, if the national grid has the lack of ability to feed into the grid for a period of, shall we say, 5 to 10 years, then the solar farm effectively will have an extension. It will exist for a further 10 years more than we are supposing it will at this stage were it to go ahead. And I think a lot of people would find that unacceptable or even perverse. So it's absolutely vital that we decide when so is the solar farm complete when the final panel is inserted, or is it only when the first amount of power is registered in the national grid? I think that's the point, isn't it? Because otherwise we have a situation where the solar farm could materially exist. It would sit there producing nothing at all. It would be apparent to all the people living in the area, all the ramblers, the visual impact would be there, but there would actually be no public benefit until it was connected to the grid. And that is something which has to be weighed up in the pros and cons. Thank you.
The proverbial blot on the landscape.
So just to come back on that, what I would propose would be condition 3 would be the first energisation, which is causing the concern, will be connection to the grid. And then we would have another condition with wording delegated to officers, if members are agreeable, would be to make sure that they connect to the grid within 6 months of completion of the solar array.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think Christine will confirm the process.
Okay, can I just say as well, of course, that would be a process which would be beyond the scope of the applicant. The applicant has no control over when it gets probably connected to the grid. If National Grid are saying to Elgin Power, we haven't got facility to feed into the national grid at this stage, then that process wouldn't start. As I say, it would be in the gift of a third party, not the applicant.
Councillor Sultan.
I throw a little curveball on this, perhaps, that rather than it being connected to the national grid, there are quite a few areas of solar paneling that do local feed, so it becomes a local grid for the village itself, and it's usually a lot more cost effective as well, because the provider can provide at cheaper than the national grid is providing, and the consumer pays less than the national grid charges. So perhaps that could be considered. I don't want to delay the process. I'm all in favour of solar panels. Let's get as many as we can, but maybe there's another way around this to make it a local infrastructure supply.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I don't want to get bogged down with this. I think we have to probably come to a decision. If we're going to determine this one, we probably need to leave the determination of the definition of when it starts as delegated powers, quite honestly. Otherwise, we could be here all night. Does that rest easily with you, Sarah? That's something which will have to be thrashed out at delegated level, to be honest with you. Okay. Councillor Patel. Yes, I know. Yes, we do.
I think Councillor Salter made a very good point over there. If it turns out that the developer can't connect the solar panels to the national grid, and if we say 40 years is the limit once it's ready, then if you can't connect it to the natural grid, it's in his or her interest to connect it to the local area. So that way it's winning all round.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure whether that's practicable, but I'm going to leave that to the officers, because otherwise we should be going round and round in circles. So we have had this application proposed for approval by Councillor Chetland. It's been seconded by Councillor Ann Cattell. I think we have determined that the condition in terms of the start date.
Chair, can we just take one step back?
Okay.
The condition that's been suggested by councillor Salter, is that actually seconded? Or do we have a second of, do we have a second of the condition?
We do.
Yeah, councillor Ashton.
Councillor Ashton, thank you very much.
So then if we deal with the main application itself, I think we have, councillor Salter and
No,
councillor
Councillor
Checkland and councillor Anketel. Okay,
That's correct,
that's
yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Okay, so members, this application has been proposed for approval by the Vice Chairman, councillor Checkland. It has been seconded by councillor Anketel. You've heard all the arguments for and against, and the report has been explained to you as well. Questions have been answered. Could I have a show of hands, please? Sorry.
What I would like, so what I would actually like, so amendment has been put forward. I want to vote on that first,
Okay,
because then we would, that would then become a substantial
okay,
recommendation, and that's what we'll vote on.
okay.
So if we can vote on the amendment put forward by councillor Salter and Ashton. If members aren't sure, I'm sure I could ask councillor Salter to repeat that.
Councillor Sills, do you want to just reiterate that, please?
I'm happy to, sir, that's the start date for the 40th period should commence at the point that the connection to the grid is made. I believe that the officer was saying that they would try and get it in 6 months, but I don't know if we can actually put a time on it, because that's out of our scope.
Thank you, councillor Salter. Can we vote on that, please, members? So we're voting on the,
Yeah, so it's what Kerry said, that
Yep.
wording will be delegated.
Yes.
Scott.
Oh, yes.
yeah, I think we have to do it that
Yes.
way, otherwise it's going to get too complicated. Members, can I have a show of hands, please? Those in support of just that,
Yeah, so
just that condition.
the
yeah.
condition and the wording,
We're only voting on the condition.
yeah, so.
So can we vote on that condition, please? Being proposed there by councillor Salter.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
There are two.
9, 10.
Okay, any against? Any abstains? Thank you.
1 abstention.
Thank you very much. So we now come on to the main item, which is the fact it's being proposed by councillor Checkland, seconded by councillor Anketel, to approve this application, which of course is with that amendment, yes, incorporating that amendment, which of course is in line with the officer's recommendations. So can I have a show of hands, please, for all of those in favour of approving this application?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, I've got that.
Any against, please? Any abstentions, please? 2 abstentions. Okay, so in that case, I can say that 22 oblique 00110 oblique FUL has been approved by this planning committee here on the 3rd of July 2023. Thank you very much indeed, members, and also thank you to Sarah Atherton, the officer, for taking us through that. I also would like to thank the objector and also the applicant's agent as well. Thank you. Free to leave, anyone wishing to leave may do so. I can guarantee that all the applications aren't normally as long-winded as that, so we've got another 4 applications. You can take it from me that you won't still be here at 11:15 tonight. Or if you are, I shan't be. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much, councillor Salter. Thanks. We can now reconvene, and we move on to the next item on the agenda, members, which is application. Got it written down, I've lost it. Okay, it's application 22 oblique 01282 oblique FUL, and to take us through this one, I'm going to call upon Kerry Challoner, sitting on my right hand side. Kerry, this one hopefully will be slightly less challenging than the previous one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Some members may recall this back from the 6th of March meeting. This application relates to land around the Greyhound Public House, which fronts onto Upper St John's Street. So it's quite a prominent site. I think quite a few of you will recognise it as we go through the photographs. Greyhound Public House is there. My look, it's not working very well, and the site is outlined in red there. It's typically a residential area. Up St John's Street is one of our main routes into and out of the city. The other thing which I should point out on this site here is a Holy Cross Church, which is a listed church that's referred to in the report. There's the aerial view. This was before the development's taken place. The application that you're looking at this evening is a retentional application. There's a retention of eight dwellings, 5 2-beds and 3 3-bed properties. There's some photographs of the site. So as I've said, the properties have been constructed. They are ready to be lived in. I think the applicant's been heating them over the winter, keeping them empty. Unfortunately, it's before us because it wasn't built in accordance with approved plans. This site got consent originally back in 2013, I think, for 8 houses, and it was allowed on appeal. I'm not sure, some members may have been on committee back then where we refused the application and the inspector allowed it. There we go, the houses are constructed, and that's the layout of the site. In terms of going back to members' concerns, they all surrounded the noise impacts on future residents coming from the Greyhound Public House. And we had some quite eloquent speakers who were really concerned that if this, the public house, which is currently unused, when it comes back into use, would impact on the residents of the future residents and occupiers of these properties. Since then, the applicant has commissioned a noise report, which has been fully assessed by our environmental health team. The noise report basically confirms that the houses would not be detrimentally affected by the public house. To skew things a little bit, the public house has got a planning consent, which was issued a couple of weeks ago, which was also at the same planning committee, to confuse things. And that recommendation was to delegate to officers to ensure that we had appropriate noise mitigation. Now, this noise report basically secures that with appropriate glazing in the windows, conditions for external plants, make sure that they don't put something noisy extractors on the back that affect the occupiers and neighbouring properties. Essentially, the public house was occupied before. It's always been occupied as a public house, and there's always been residents around it. The noise report picks up that the actual Upper St John Street is probably the biggest noise impact on that site because it's quite a busy road. So in terms of the recommendation, or going back to the whole principle of the site was approved by a planning inspector. It's in a sustainable location within the Lichfield city boundaries. The design of it is considered to be acceptable. The conservation officer raised no objections on the grounds of the impact on the listed building. Residential amenity was also covered in the original report and debated last time, and that was seen to be acceptable. We've got ecology conditions to improve ecology across the site, and conditions also to make sure that the access and parking is provided. There's no technical objections to the scheme, so it's back before you this evening with a recommendation to approve, subject to the conditions set out in the report. And that concludes my presentation.
Kerry, sorry, excuse me. Kerry, thank you very much indeed for that. Councillor Evans, do you wish to speak?
Yes, Chair, I think now that all the concerns that were there have been addressed, and environmental health have not issued any other things that they wish to be considered. Certainly on page 49, the MPP, it says that about the fact that the new development can be integrated into the existing facilities. And it shouldn't have unreasonable restrictions placed upon them. So I think that everything now has been met, and I noticed that the condition regarding car parking, which is important because you can't park on St John Street, is that that is purely for the occupants of the properties, and that should remain as such. But apart from that, I think that everything has been covered, so I'd move approval.
Councillor Evans, thank you very much indeed. Do we have anyone wishing to second that? Thank you very much, Councillor Anne Cattell. Thank you. In that case, then I think we'll go straight to a vote. So members, there you have it. It's being proposed for approval by Councillor Evans, seconded by Councillor Anne Cattell. Could I please have a show of hands for those wishing to approve this application, please? That's unanimous, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Gosh, what a difference 10 minutes made. Like I'm living in a parallel universe. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We shall now, and Kerry, thank you very much indeed for that as well. I bet you wish all your applications were as quite straightforward as that, don't you?
I'll take the payment later.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Moving on, members, to the next one, which is 220/01533 FUH. And this is the one which is at Foden Close, and this is going to be presented, I think, by you, Kerry, is that correct? Yes. So Kerry, once again, I should be calling upon your services, please. So members, this is 22/01533 FUH. As said, it's 9 Foden Close, Shenstone. And if this rings a bell with one or two of the members who've been here before the election in May of this year, then that's because it has been to the planning committee before. I'm going to ask Kerry Challoner then to take us through this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As you've just said, yes, this has been before us before, and this is an application for a retrospective application for the retention of a detached double garage. I think when we first considered it, the garage wasn't constructed. The application was called in by Councillor Salter, as set out in the report, and the main concerns were the design, impacts on residential amenity, and conflict with planning policy. So as we can see in terms of the location of the site, it's within the village of Shenstone, and we've got the Lammas lands to the rear, and it's within the sort of envelope of the sort of built form of that estate. The application is a detached property located at the western end of Foden Close. It terminates, the application property is at the hammerhead of the close, so it's at the end of the close. And so we've got number 9, which is outlined in red. It's not working. And number 11 is opposite. I'll point this out better on the photographs that are coming up. Objections have been received from neighbouring occupiers and the parish council. In terms of design, the garage has been designed with matching materials. Now it's been constructed, members can clearly see what it looks like and the materials that have been used. The supplementary paper, I should point out before I completely forget, the supplementary paper confirms, clarifies, the numbers that are of the conditions. So the application is for the garage. That's the garage in view next to its neighbouring garage at number 11. That's number 11 on the right hand side there. I'll point that doesn't work, sorry. The driveway is also being completed now in light grey, and then there's a wall that sits behind the garage. In terms of the design, officers are satisfied that the design with matching materials, it's a domestic scale to ensure that a satisfactory appearance. It blends in with the surrounding built form. In terms of residential amenity, the garage has not resulted in a significant loss of light or outlet to neighbouring occupiers that would sustain a refusal of the application. And it also retains a rear private amenity area to serve the application property number 9 of approximately 90 metres squared, which is well in excess of our requirements set out in our SPD. A high standard of amenity is therefore being retained by the development. The policy, having regard to all relevant local and national policies and guidance, has concluded that this development is acceptable in principle at this location and does not give rise to any significant impacts that or acknowledged interests. And as such, the recommendation is as set out in the agenda pack, which is to rescind the resolution of the planning committee on the 6th of February 2023 to grant planning permission subject to conditions, and that this application be approved subject to the conditions set out in this report. And that concludes the presentation.
Kerry, thank you very much indeed. Unlike the last application, but more in keeping with the first, we have got speakers, and the first is Mr. Andrew Buse, who is the objector. Mr. Buse, if you'd like to take your seat by the microphone, please. You will be aware, I think, if you're here at the start of the meeting, you've got 5 minutes to speak, and with 30 seconds still to elapse, you will be notified of that. You must stop speaking if you are still doing so once your 5 minutes has elapsed. Thank you.
Good evening. I speak today on behalf of the 13 objectors. We're here for the 3rd time because a professional builder and a professional planning team can't undertake the basics of their own professions. The low lights of previous meetings stroke events are a 33-minute recess for the planning team and Mr. Smith to get their act together, which was subsequently incorrect anyway. A garage footing extending ahead of our garage by 4.5 metres instead of 3 metres, which were on the plans. An IOC reportable data breach. And finally, with breathtaking arrogance and a disregard to this committee's powers, the garage has been completely built now without your planning permission and not in accordance with the plan submitted. How difficult is it for these professionals to get their paperwork correct? Nevertheless, we are here again with these professionals asking you to uphold their recommendations after they had blundered previously. If Councillors Salter, Thompson and ourselves had not raised these issues, the errors would have gone unchallenged. I have no experience in these matters, so I've taken advice from both legal and via an independent planning consultant. And once again, we believe that you've not been given the correct information by the planning team and it's open to challenge at judicial review and the Ombudsman. Can you be comfortable with everything in the report as being correct? If I were in your shoes, I would at least check a few facts. Why has the 13 specific planning legislations raised in the last meeting not been responded to within the report? Why is the most recent notice and plans served to date different from the plans shown within the planning portal? Why has the portal consultation been closed since March to accept further objections? Is the latest planning report accurate with the dimensions of the plans? Why is the new wall and gates higher than the previous wall and above 2 metres in height? Why is the new garage built beyond the recommended distance and has light shining into our bedroom window at night? Has any competent individual from the planning team physically viewed the unauthorised garage build? Finally, you're advised not to worry about restrictive covenants, as that's a civil matter. Perhaps it's not relevant to planning, but relevant to access for the proposed garage. In short, you're being asked to approve a garage that will have no permitted access to it. If the applicant believes the covenants have no legal standing, then why should access be granted by the landowners of 11 Foden Close? I'd also be wondering why all the residents and the local parish council are still objecting to this build with such passion. Perhaps it's because a formal complaint was submitted on the 21st of February 2023 for maladministration to the planning team. To date, we've received no outcome, despite being promised the complaint would be dealt with before the application came to the committee. We've got this in writing. Within this complaint are a simple number of questions that needed answering. Richard Sunter confirmed to the chair that the applicant had signed certificate B on the 16th of November 2022. We believe that this was a false declaration, incorrect and misleading. It's an offence to commit a false or misleading certificate, and that comes with a maximum fine of £5,000. We still don't know the answers to the following questions. The number of retrospective applications that have been received in the last 3 years. The number of retrospective applications that have been refused in the last 3 years. The number of applications where the planning committee have gone against the planning officer's recommendation in either approving or refusing an application in the last 3 years. I'd also be asking why, after 132 days, 132 days, are these questions still unanswered before agreeing to this submission? Planning decisions affect people's lives and the value of land. It is critical that the decision is made fairly and in accordance with policies that have been tested and found sound and in the public's interest. There is clear supporting evidence raised today to refuse the application based on the content within the councillor's workbook on planning page 12.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hughes. We now have Councillor David Salter. Councillor Salter, please. As you will know, as the ward councillor, you've gone slightly longer than members of the public. You have got 10 minutes if you wish to exercise that prerogative. Your time will start when you start speaking, and after 9.5 minutes, if you are still speaking, you will be notified. Okay. So you have 10 minutes once you start. Thank you.
Thank you, good evening, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. We're here to debate what should have been a simple application to build a detached garage. However, although applications occasionally, although rarely, come back to this committee to resolve a small problem or confirm a slight change, indeed we don't want to see truly seeking, we find ourselves here in this case for an unprecedented third time. And to be quite honest, I firmly believe this might not be the last. For those new to this committee, I will briefly cover some of the reasons for its successive reviews. The problem started when the applicant began work, including the demolition of a 2-metre high boundary wall and installing footings for the double garage before any permission was granted. I would add that this method of preempting planning permission is sadly becoming increasingly prevalent. Strong objection to this application was submitted by Shenstone Parish Council, highlighting the various infringements to their adopted and approved neighbourhood plan, and also listing the contravention of several NPPF policies. There were also no fewer than 13 objections from residents who were in danger of losing the only open aspect view, which is to the Lamb's Land, and which was a design feature of the entire 120 home development, which itself was approved by this very council when the Millbrook estate was built. Despite these objections, permission was granted, but then withdrawn a few days later when it was pointed out that the planning officer had failed to see that the proposed plans did not match the already advanced build. At its second hearing, further errors, contraventions and omissions were pointed out, including the fact that there had been a previous similar application on the adjacent cul-de-sac on the same estate, which had been rejected by not only this council, but also at its independent appeal hearing. This precedent was dismissed by the planning officer as being dissimilar, because that one was for a wall and this one was for a building. The fact that the rejected wall would have been only 2 metres high and this garage could be nearly 4 metres high did not seem to matter. Also presented were several highly detailed, exact scale and professionally created 3D artist impressions and visual representations of what the finished construction would look like. And in fact, the photographs you've seen this evening exactly mirror those artist impressions. However, these expensive productions were casually dismissed by the planning officer, referring to them as photoshopped pictures and suggesting that they should be disregarded. I felt this to be not only extremely derogatory and disrespectful, but also totally contradictory to the norm. As we all know, the majority of submissions to this committee include artists' impressions. Our very first picture this evening of the solar panels was exactly that. Even the line drawn plans are only indicative, but all of them are used as a persuasive aid. Indeed, the same officer presented several artist impressions in guidance and support of subsequent applications on that very evening. It was also revealed at that meeting that the applicant's suggested boundary line actually encompassed a part of the neighbouring property and that the neighbour had not been consulted. At that point, the legal officer advised that a boundary dispute was a civil matter and not for debate at this council. However, there then followed a 33-minute recess in the proceedings, with the live stream halted, whilst the legal officer and the planning officer left the room to debate the boundary situation, during which time the applicant, but not the objector, was called out of the room to join the discussion. Highly irregular, and I believe totally unnecessary, possibly even unlawful. Despite all of the above, permission was again granted by the then committee, only to again be overturned a few days later when it was again pointed out that the now completed building did not conform to the submitted plans. And so, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, we find ourselves here again, due in no small way to a catalogue of errors and oversights on the part of, I'm sorry to say, our planning office, which includes still no clear addressing of the 13 contraventions of planning legislation. And I'm sorry, but for me, the words from a planning officer, in my opinion, it doesn't, really isn't an answer or a reason. As an example of an as yet unanswered question is the one of whether it is built on backland. Backland can usually be defined as development behind the rear of the building, but this is not an absolute. The affected site has been very clearly back and front garden for over 30 years. The building has breached the dividing wall in both directions. Because in this instance, the wall separating the front and rear gardens is curved due to it being at the end of a cul-de-sac, the new build is not fully behind the dwelling, but it is without doubt in its back garden. As if all of the above was not enough, there are still new and serious problems emerging. As previously mentioned, the finished garage build does not conform to the submitted plans in size or position, but also the replacement garden wall has now been built. On this matter, the planning officer's report is inaccurate, as the new wall and gates are higher than the original wall, which was 2 metres. Therefore, this also needs planning approval. And I would add that such a wall would be an absolute comparison to the rejected wall application I referred to earlier. There has also been, I'm sorry to say, another serious error on the part of the planning officer. The most recent notice and plans served to date differ from the plans shown within our planning portal. And to add, during the 21-day consultation period for this new submission, the portal was closed, preventing further objection. Had this application been submitted openly and in accordance with the policy prior to building work commencing, I firmly believe that it would not have been successful. It almost seems as though the planning office is trying to push the application through to hide the numerous errors and outlines that should have been outlined continuously by objectors. Before making any decisions this evening, I would urge council to seek full and clear reasoning from the officers on all 13 infringements and breaches of planning policy, for which I have provided our chairman with a list. Should it be decided that even with all those contraventions, a building could be permitted, as this is not, nor should it ever become, any form of dwelling, there should be no reason why a flat roof should not be imposed, thereby removing the high pent roof and thus restoring a portion, at least, of the aspect and views originally afforded to the rest of the residents by the granting of the development and its original design 30 years ago. Further, I would ask that strict conditions be imposed in respect of the use of the building and that all permitted development rights for the entire site be removed. Finally, the new built wall situation needs properly addressing. And to be honest, Mr. Chairman, with all of the ongoing and unresolved issues and problems, I would really not be surprised if this does not come back to this committee for a 4th hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a very comprehensive, I suppose in some ways slightly concerning resume as well. Thank you, Councillor Salter. I'm now going to call upon the next speaker. This is on behalf of the applicant, and this is Dr. James Spooner. Dr. Spooner, I do apologise, Dr. Spooner, you have 5 minutes, and with 30 seconds still to go, you will be notified, and your 5 minutes will start as soon as you commence speaking. Thank you.
Good evening, esteemed members of the council and fellow residents. I stand before you today as a representative for Mr. Thomas Smith, who unfortunately could not be here in person due to other commitments. I'm tasked with delivering this message and hope to do it justice. As many of you are aware from the evidence presented, the garage in question has been completed in line with the submitted plan to see today, which were previously approved on 2 separate occasions with unanimous agreement. It is beyond doubt in harmony with both the existing property and the surrounding area. Notice you'll see they have not implemented a flat roof because the eaved roof matches the adjacent garage directly next to them, contributing positively to the local aesthetic while adhering to high standards of construction. Mr. Smith would like to extend his sincerest apologies for any misunderstanding or miscommunication caused by the minor discrepancies in paperwork that led to this situation, which is to clarify why construction of the garage proceeded despite the interim hold due to this administrative hiccup. Personal circumstances necessitated a swift progression of the work. During the renovations at Bowden Close, Mr. Smith and his family resided in rented accommodation, initially on a 6-month lease. The contract was extended twice due to necessity of revisiting the committee hearings and outcome of paperwork irregularities. As of March, this temporary residence was no longer available, leading them to move into the house at Bowden Close. To make the property habitable and indeed safe, the driveway, which was rubble at the time, needed to be completed. Garage brickwork was integral to this process. Further, as evidenced by the photographs, to erect a boundary wall and affix the necessary security gates, the garage had to be in place. With a young child and security concerns at play, this became a priority. Let me assure you, the decision to continue with the construction of the garage while awaiting the resolution of the paperwork issue was not taken lightly. It was dictated by necessity and safety concerns and undertaken with utmost respect for this council and the original committee members and the Lichfield District Council. It's my opinion that you are here today to evaluate the plans as they appear to you, not the administrative errors that have led to this third submission. The application should be judged by the completed garage against the submitted plans. The oversight is not the fault of Mr. Thomas Smith, therefore administrative practices should be judged outside of this application. Mr. Smith hopes that following tonight's meeting, we can put this issue to rest, avoiding any further expenditure of time and resources from both the council and committee members. Throughout this process, his goal has been to uphold the integrity of his actions and contribute positively to the community through careful restoration of his property. The past 8 months since the initial application for planning was submitted have been both taxing both financially and emotionally Mr. Smith and his family. The matter in question, after all, revolves around a single-storey garage. It is their sincerest hope that we can reach a positive resolution today and put this protracted issue behind us. Thank you for your understanding and for your time.
Dr. Spooner, thank you very much indeed for representing the applicant there. Thank you. Before I do anything else, I'm going to hand over to the legal officer, Mr. Stuart Evans.
Yes, through you, Chair. I've carefully listened to the various submissions which have been made. I've spoken to officers as well. And through you, Chair, I think there's, in my opinion, there's sufficient outstanding questions here. I'm fairly new to this application. There's sufficient outstanding questions here that need further review. And I have concerns here, and I would suggest that the deferment takes place this evening so that all of these issues can be considered. You know, Councillor Salter has set out the application contravenes the following, so I'd like to have a look at all of these potential contraventions, and I have some other issues here which have been raised as well. So I would suggest that we defer so that further review of the papers can take place.
Thank you very much, members. You have the advice there of the legal officer, and so that is based upon the information that he's been listening to over the last 20 minutes or so. And I think obviously whatever happens, we do need to resolve this. And so I'm going to ask you, please, the recommendation is for it to be deferred. Could I please have a show of hands from members whether you're willing to accept that recommendation, please, the deferral?
Is it second?
I have it seconded, Councillor Checkland. Councillor Checkland seconded, thank you. So that has been seconded. So members, yes, please raise your hands if you're willing to accept that. Thank you very much indeed. That is unanimous. And I think it goes without saying that it absolutely is essential that we manage to get to grips with all the issues at stake here. This has gone on for rather too long. It's been a very protracted business, and sadly, Councillor Salter's comments about it coming back to the planning committee a fourth time have proven to be remarkably prescient. Thank you very much indeed for that decision. So we will, as a planning department, have to deal with that with some haste to make sure that we can resolve